Welcome back to the Inside the Rink podcast. It's episode 26. We will cover the World Cup of Hockey returning in 2028. Noah Dobson is changing agents amidst trade rumors. Could Mikko Rantanen be on the move again? And the Four Nations face-off. Is it a hit or is it a miss? All of this, much more, and it's coming right up. But first, I figure, I would give a welcome to my co-host, Chris Lavallee. Chris, how are you doing after a weekend of nothingness before chaos?
Nothingness in New England. If you're in the area, we got hit with a giant storm. So there was not a whole lot of something going on up here.
Yeah, so Manitoba's cold, so you say there's a storm for you, and getting warmer where I am up in the central area, and yeah, just a lot of stuff going on, but also not a lot. So this is heavy, but also not. And we're, like I said, the chaos, and that's a trade deadline. We're slowly creeping up into that. But I just want to kind of get on with things, and I want to hear a word from our sponsor, and that's DraftKings Sportsbook.
DraftKings Sportsbook is Boston's hometown sportsbook. It's live right here in Massachusetts. Bet local on all your favorite sports from the comfort of your own home with DraftKings. To celebrate, all new customers will receive up to $250 in bonus bets when you sign up for DraftKings Sportsbook using code ITR. You can now bet local on moneyline spreads, props, and more with one of America's top-rated sportsbooks. That's DraftKings Sportsbook. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app. Sign up with the code ITR to get up to $250 in bonus bets to use. Now that mobile sports betting is live in Massachusetts, that's code ITR, and it's only at DraftKings Sportsbook.
If your loved one is experiencing problems with gambling, call 800-327-5050 or visit helplinema.org to speak with a trained specialist, free and confidentially, 24/7, must be 21 plus, physically present in Mass. Eligibility restrictions apply, subject to regulatory licensing requirements. Eligibility and deposit restrictions apply. Opt-in required. Bonus issued as free bets. Terms at DraftKings.com/MA.
All right. Well, the first on the list is the Mikko Rantanen stuff, and that he could be on the move again. And Frank Saravalli reported on his show, the Daily Faceoff podcast, that Rantanen could be traded due to a concern that he may not re-sign with the Carolina Hurricanes. And he threw out a lot of scenarios. And the first one that I found pretty interesting was a potential sign and trade because of that 8th year. And we've seen time and time again that the 8th year for contracts means a lot to players. Look at Matthew Tkachuk, for example. Pierre-Luc Dubois is another one that comes up to my mind first. But Rantanen being he's one of those wingers in the league that you don't find another Mikko Rantanen is. He's really good at what he does on the wing, and just I don't see why a team wouldn't want to give him that 8th year and pay him that extra dollar that he's demanding for it. And yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I'd be surprised if he gets moved again. I think realistically, Carolina will find a way to come to a deal with him. But I don't know what team would be interested to take him on.
Well, I know on the Daily Face-Off, when Saravalli was saying or throwing out scenarios, one of the biggest scenarios that he threw out was the possibility that Mikko Rantanen is signed and then traded to the Chicago Blackhawks, which I find really interesting given Bedard, like the whole rebuild with Bedard, and like they want to be competitive now. They have a decent enough team, but the biggest thing that is coming to light with the Chicago Blackhawks is they don't have that guy who's the number 2 to Mikko or to Connor Bedard, pardon me. And that could be Mikko Rantanen. And I think we're seeing a lot of what the Chicago Blackhawks should do. So maybe the Blackhawks could be that number 1, but Chris, do you think there's another team that could be at play for Rantanen should he not re-sign with the Hurricanes?
I mean, realistically, off the top of my head, no. But did anybody really see Carolina being the team to acquire him in the first place? So, I mean, who knows what could happen? The Blackhawks, I could see it. It'd be an interesting move. It'd be interesting to see what they give up to make that trade. But there's just off the top of my head no other team I can think of that I could see a trade with. I can see Carolina extending him.
Okay, like, do you think it's a 1-year deal, or do you think it's a bridge deal of like 3 years? Just throwing out hypotheticals here.
I could see the 3 years. I could see a 3-year deal and let him play it out and go from there. And then maybe at the end of 2.5 years in that deadline, there's a move made.
Okay, and I say that because one of the things that I listened to on a podcast, it was the Ray and Dregs show, and Ray Ferraro brought up a really good point about how much the salary cap is going up. And we're going to see a player maximum contract be just north of $19 million a season. And another scenario that isn't too far fetched that Ray Ferraro brought up was we could see Rantanen sign a 1-year deal at $19 million or just north of that, just so they can have a little bit of extra time to figure things out. But one of the big things that he mentioned was, hey, we don't know what team that is with. Is maybe a team acquires his rights for a 4th or 5th round pick, and then they start the negotiation process after that 1-year deal is once that's signed. And could that be the thing that we see? I don't know, but that's kind of up to what his agent is able to help him with. And like, just from what I see and what you see, Chris, on the outsider perspective, I'm going to use the term outsider perspective as we're gathering a lot of this secondhand, I would say, but it's just one of those things where you look at it from where we are and you're like, oh, okay, a lot of smoke from this side, but then there's just a blaze on that other side. You know what I'm kind of trying to say?
I do. It's going to be an interesting trade deadline. I think if you add Rantanen's name back into it all over again, it's going to be even more interesting.
And another big player that's at play right now is Noah Dobson, but it's not quite sure if he's at play. And then out of nowhere is he switches agents, and that comes from Steven Rosner, that his previous agent, Andrew Maloney, Dobson just decides, you know what, I need a new agent. And he goes with 2 people, Judd Moldaver and then Olivier Fortier of Wasserman. So one of the big things I want to note that Dobson's agent, his lead agent is Fortier. And just to fuel a little more speculation on the trade speculation is Dobson's lead agent specializes in helping clients get traded, whereas the other person in Moldaver specializes in the contract extension side of things. And Dobson's stat lines, he's coming off of a 70-point season in 2023-24, and he's got 24 points in 46 games this season. So he's on a bit of a dip, but one of the things that I do want to point out with Noah Dobson is he's a 6'4", 200-pound right shot defender who play either side, and he's relatively physical. And that you don't see that bill on the trade deadline market, let alone on the trade market. So with the way that Dobson has played for the Islanders, and given the step back he's taken and the injury that he's currently dealing with, I could see teams making a bit of a hesitation to acquire him. But at the same time is when you don't see that bill to be fit, where it's a top pairing defender who's physical and adds size to your blue line, doesn't subtract from that size, teams might make a swing. And Chris, I don't know about you, is there's a lot of teams in the NHL who would want to take that swing that are in playoff spots.
Well, so what I saw today was a lot of, with the change that he made with his agents, it signals that they're going to get an extension done. But I did see that he was a name that was floated out in previous trades for Elias Pettersson. Now, obviously, we know Vancouver has mentioned after the JT Miller trade that they're not really looking to move Pettersson. So, but Dobson's name and the Islanders were all aboard the idea of adding Pettersson. And from what I had seen, was a lot of it included Dobson. And so, obviously, like I said, with this change in the agency, I think it signals that there's an extension coming. He's staying. And again, the length, who knows? The AAV, who knows? But I could see him sticking around.
Okay. And one of the notes that I want to make, or one of the points I want to make, is depending on the outcome of all of this, like changing agency, and usually when a player changes agents, it means they want to change the scenery or they just want to get something done. There's no middle ground. That's one main thing.
Especially at this point in the season.
Yeah, like we're midway point of the season or just over that midway point. We're getting into the deadline stuff of things. Dobson might want to be the guy who the Islanders build around. And like that's just speculation, of course, but I just want to point out that Dobson's salary is going to without a doubt double in his next contract. But that's a decision the Islanders have to make, or another team will have to make if they want to make that long-term commitment to Noah Dobson. He's struggled offensively this year, like I mentioned. He's only got 6 goals and 18 assists, which is 24 points in 46 games played. So he's about that 0.5 games played mark. But also, he's coming off of that 10 goals, 60 assists, 70 point, and 79 game played. That's his last season stat. This year, it's just the way that Dobson's kind of taken that step back is you have to wonder, is there a hesitancy from the Islanders to extend Dobson long term? And I would say there might be a little bit of hesitancy, but at the end of the day is Noah Dobson, like I said, one of those premier defenders, and you don't get that 6'4" right shot physical defender. I know, Chris, you and I can both agree that a team like the Red Wings, the Sabres, like any team that is looking to build into the future or look to make a push for the Stanley Cup, they would love a Noah Dobson on their pairing. And that goes without saying. And you look at rosters and international competition. And speaking of international competition, the World Cup of Hockey is returning. Like February 2028. We haven't seen it since 2016. So 12 years in the making it'll be by the time that it comes back. Bettman's hopes are 8 teams, no team North America or team Europe, which I find quite interesting. So
same. I question that with what are the other 2 teams you're going to replace it with. So I'm intrigued to see what they add. I mean, we obviously can all agree what we think the 6 teams are that are guaranteed.
Yeah.
And I was really surprised in the timing of the announcement because it came Wednesday afternoon. So it was just after, and we'll get into the 4 Nations, but it was just after the first game of the 4 Nations. So did the hype of the 4 Nations speed this up to make an agreement between the NHL and NHLPA? I also, as I've watched the 4 Nations, I wish it was every year. I wish they did the World Cup of Hockey every year, except for the Olympic year. And this was just the way it was going forward, and there was no All-Star game. I like the All-Star game. I like the skills competition, but what we've seen over the last couple of days, over the last week or so, is what should be going forward.
Yeah, and getting on to the point of the World Cup of Hockey and 4 Nations side of things is I think we're going to see a format to where you have the Olympics 2026 and then 2030. You're going to have World Cup of Hockey 2028 and 2032. And then those years where there isn't Olympics or World Cup of Hockey, the NHL is going to have some sort of like 4 Nations or tournament where it's country representative. Because we'll get into this in a bit, but it seems like when the guys put this when they put the logo of their country or their country on their jersey, it's a whole different ball game for them. And I think the NHL saw that and said, you know what? Like, we might have hit a home run. And I remember myself going into the tournament, I was a little standoffish. I was like, it just seems like an excuse to not have the World Cup of hockey this year. But I see the just how much good has come out of the tournament, where players, they're being physical and they want to play to win. And you see this.
They're treating this like the Stanley Cup playoffs. Like the whole it's just a round robin right now, and they're treating it like the Stanley Cup playoffs.
Which, with the Four Nations, like that final game on Thursday between Canada and the USA, I know I'm not doing anything other than I'm going to sit down and I'm going to watch the game and I'm going to enjoy myself.
Yep.
And I know a lot of people are going to agree with that sentiment, because with the way that we've seen this whole tournament just kind of I don't want to say explode, but just a positive that has come out is there's so much that we can take away and say, oh, well, it could have been better, but like, it's been a hit from the day one. And is it a hit or is it a miss is a question that we have. And I would say it's a hit just off of how much the players have put into it. And it seems like they've taken a whole new meaning to this Four Nations, which was it was dubbed by a lot of people as just a lame excuse to not have the All-Star game. But speaking of the All-Star game, is players would kind of half-ass everything, like we saw with Kucherov, because they want to put their country on a jersey and play for their country, because we're seeing what means more to a player. And we're seeing now 9.5 some years later, since the last time we had a international competition of any sort, you got Crosby, McDavid, McKinnon, Makar all on one team. And it's a hell of a spectacle. It's like Canada's first game took 50 something seconds to score on the power play.
Mm-hmm.
It's a lot of fun to watch. And with the NHL wanting to bring back the World Cup of hockey and the 8-team stuff, I wonder why they don't want to have a Team North America or Team Europe, which I do want to also say is they were U23 teams. So they weren't all the best players from that group. So that, like, with the NHL wanting to move away from that, is it because the talent pool is drastically different from when it was McDavid, Eichel, and Matthews to Bedard, and all of them? Like, is it because that talent pool is different, or is it because they don't want to see just a generalized or a made-up group?
I think that's more so it is. They don't want to see the generalized group. Because, I mean, if you think about it, in 2028, realistically, you could have a team where you're having Celebrini and Bedard playing together on Team North America. Like, that's the young stars of the game. You put that on one team. That's a lot of fun to watch. I mean, I'd be locked into I'd buy a Team North America jersey with Celebrini on the back. I mean, I just think it's what other countries get more involved and what can we bring. And I'd be curious to see what they do. Like I said, I mean, a couple of years to figure it out, obviously, but I'd be intrigued what teams are the remaining two to make it 8, because he did make it almost like a statement, like we're going to have 8 teams. I mean, that's the way I took it. I don't know how you took it, but it was almost like he said, guarantee we're going to have 8 teams and the best 8 teams.
I know that they don't want to have a made up, like a Team Europe or something, but if you add, like, with all due respect, like if you have Germany, Denmark, like countries that can't roster a full 23 team with NHL players or really good players, and that's no disrespect to the country, it's just, it's the talent difference, because the USA and the Canadians arguably can roster like 2 or 3 teams in these tournaments and still be pretty competitive.
Yep.
do you have it to where Germany and Denmark, like they have a collective team, like Team Germany dash Denmark or something like that? That's what I'm wondering if those,
I
like
could
the
see
8
that.
teams,
I could
but
definitely see that.
then you would run into the point where you need a Team Europe, and then going back on the word, but I also don't like my biggest takeaway from that press conference is I didn't see Bettman shutting the door completely on no Team Europe or Team North America. I can see Team North America not being a thing in the tournament. I can see Team Europe or Team Europe Gold and Team Europe Black, because
Mm-hmm.
having that talent pool a little more dispersed, and then you have guys like Draisaitl play with some guys like Ehlers from countries where maybe it's not as well represented, like in terms of what they have for NHL talent, but they can still compete and be up with teams like Canada, the US. They may not win every game, but they can still compete because they got guys that can play. And if you, I'm going to leave it on this thought, but if you combine all these teams together, or these countries that don't have, like, say, 5 or 6 NHL stars, if you combine them all together, I think it would be better from a sales and marketing standpoint, because then you could go off of like a Europe logo, but on the back of it, it has the country that player is from. It's a
I like that.
very, yeah, or you have the country they're from and the Europe logo on the back. You could do something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And now getting back to the Four Nations face off, we've already seen a few injuries, and the main one is the Shea Theodore injury. He's out week to week. But Chris, how does this impact the Vegas Golden Knights regular season? As
I mean, we all know the backstory of what Vegas does. I could see this being an injury where they put him on LTIR. Because, I mean, I've seen things of ideas that he may not be back until playoffs. I mean, the hit was a typical hit. It was just an injury on the boards. But we'll see what they do. It's a tough loss, and this goes right into his teammate Alex Pietrangelo backing out. I mean, we speculated when we did a podcast a couple weeks ago about, was he injured? Was he just trying to avoid further injury? And he opted out, and obviously Drew Doughty replaced him on Team Canada, and now his teammate is out. Realistically, is it week to week? I don't. That's what they say, but
you're
it
not
seems
sure.
like it's longer. I could see more month to month, and he's back maybe like middle of April, right before the regular season ends, and plays like 1 or 2 games right before the season. Intrigued to see what they do going forward, but I think it adds also to the conversation of, like you said earlier, Dobson. Could he be a guy that they look into?
Yeah, and oh my gosh, my brain kind of just, I, with the way that Vegas has gone out at every deadline in the last 2 to 3 years specifically, I wouldn't be surprised, but it's not something that I don't think it would benefit hockey as a whole if Vegas went out and just added to an already strong blue line and they bring in Noah Dobson. Like,
They find a way to pull off that sneaky trade every year.
yeah, but then you run into the point of, do you sign him or do you flip and trade him just because you needed him for this year? Like,
Yeah, or do they move somebody else and they extend him?
true.
You know,
Like Vegas is known to be very cutthroat when it comes to these things. And like I can see even a guy that they sign long term, they like, okay, got the younger guy as you're kind of the Toy Story reference where it's like, I'm done playing with you, drops it, picks up the new toy kind of
Yep.
deal. That's the gift that went over in my head. But with Vegas, like Theodore being out, and you bring up a good point about how they've done things at the deadline is they'll shut a guy down and then bring him back for playoffs, but they're immediately a better team because it's like a own upgrade come playoff time. And I remember last year it was such a steep hill for Dallas to climb to eliminate them in 7 games. So maybe they're going to be a tougher team to beat this year in the playoffs, and Theodore's injury could impact that. And one thing that I do want to point out about the Four Nations is these guys have been hitting each other as if, oh, well, my team is are wanting to go for a Stanley Cup run. Is at the end of the day, they're trying to win. They're trying to win the tournament, and we're seeing that is they're putting things on the line. And the first example, or the best example of that throughout the entire tournament of round robin, is the Canada-US Four Nations, the round robin game. We got Matthew Tkachuk fighting Brandon Hagel, Brady Tkachuk fighting Sam Bennett, and then JT Miller fighting Colton Parayko, all within 9 seconds of game time. And with Canada beating Finland in regulation today, 5-3, and my heart was racing today, so that's a whole different story with Bennington letting in some quick goals at the end. Canada and the US will face each other in the final of the Four Nations face-off Thursday night. So depending on how the final game goes, you could argue the NHL, maybe the years that there isn't World Cup of Hockey or Olympic tournament, is they have a 7-game series between Canada and USA and Sweden and Finland. And with that being said, is you can do Canada, USA in North America, and then Sweden, Finland in Sweden and Finland, or just flip-flop the years where one team hosts. Like, could you imagine a little in-season tournament like that?
I would love that. I mean, look at the numbers. I don't know if you saw the numbers that came out yesterday from the USA-Canada game. They had 4.4 million viewers, and they had 5.2 peak million viewers. It was the most watched hockey game since the 2019 Stanley Cup Finals.
Yeah.
I mean, to me, Thursday's going to be the most watched hockey game maybe of all time. I mean, it's a championship game between U.S. and Canada. Look what it did, obviously, on Saturday night, and then add into what happened in that game. I mean, to me, the Brady Tkachuk hit on Drew Doughty on the boards was one of the best hits I've ever seen.
And then go ahead.
Add in the people that didn't watch that game.
Yeah.
Like, now that they know and they've seen the videos on, Instagram, YouTube, Facebook, whatever, and Twitter, and now, or X, sorry, and now they're going to tune into that game.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, it probably will be one of the most watched hockey games of all time.
Yeah, or in recent memory at least.
Right.
And there was a quote that came out today in Drew Doughty's post-game presser was like, would he fight Matthew Tkachuk? And he said, I'll do what's best for my country, or something along those lines. And it shows you the intensity and what these guys are playing for.
Like they all said, this is like Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Finals to them. I think it was one of the Tkachuk brothers actually said that. Like, I think it was Brady. Brady said, I've been waiting for this for so long. This is my Stanley Cup right here.
Yeah.
Because obviously he hasn't been in Stanley Cup, but.
Yeah. And Matthew has, but like at the end of the day, you have this tournament, and obviously the players care about it. The fans are loving it without a doubt. And now I guess it's a little more amplified with the political tensions between the United States and Canada, which I'm not going to get into. But you add in, like, it's a layered cake just with the way that things are. You got a complete rivalry between the US and the Canadians. And then you layer in things like players who don't like playing against certain guys and they'll do anything for their country. And then Crosby, who's like, they're dubbing him Captain Canada. And there's just so many good layers to it. And like I said, I wonder if the NHL, instead of doing a Four Nations face-off, they have that 7-game series where you have Canada, US, and then Sweden, Finland, something like that on the non-Olympic World Cup years. Because could you imagine the viewers and just all the coverage and whatnot you could do within those countries? Like, I think it would be a great thing for the game, but you come into a point where these mid-season tournaments could grow stale in the long-term aspect of things. Like,
I mean, so the tough part though is, and we go back to the injuries, is we're looking at it right now. The U.S. is playing Sweden, and this is the tough part. Like, I wonder if teams are going to put their foot down on certain things. But right now, Matthew Tkachuk's out tonight with a precaution. Austin Matthews also out as a precaution.
Yeah.
Brady Tkachuk suffered an injury you and I talked about before we went live. That
Yeah.
he had left the bench and went down the tunnel, and now he was back on the bench. And now Vinny Trocheck went down the tunnel before the period end.
Okay.
So, I mean, now U.S. is piling up with injuries ahead of that championship game on Thursday.
And
but I look at.
Go ahead.
We talked last week, and I sent you a picture of somebody who replied to us on Twitter that listened, and we talked about the time frames. I saw a lot of people last night and adding viewership where they were watching the NBA All-Star game, and they said, I wish there was a Four Nations game on tonight. And so, I think thinking back to it, like Saturday night should have been U.S. Canada, and it's tough to do the scheduling that way.
Yeah.
But like realistically, last night could have been U.S. Sweden with what was on the line tonight for Finland Canada, where either one of those teams wins in regulation, and they played on. I mean, they moved on, and if they lose, that opens the door for Sweden. But that would have been a great prime time hockey game at 8:00 for my time.
Yeah, and just with the scheduling of everything, and it's obviously to accommodate international times with Sweden and Finland. So, and I think it was the NHL catering to that market so they can tune in, and that's where they pull some more viewers. But it's like with the whole scheduling thing is covering where I was and all that is very quick, just turn around and making sure you're able to watch the very last end of the game. And I don't see why the NHL doesn't continue something like this, or at least expand it into something like I said, that 7-game series, or maybe they have it to where round robins, you can have other players come in, but for the say if you have a 7-game series to advance to that final and then play a 7-game final, maybe you do a thing or a 5-game final, something like that, just a series of games.
Mm-hmm.
You have it to where you got to cut that roster down, and then it helps you kind of avoid injuries, if you know what I'm trying to say.
Yep.
Because now we're seeing in these round robin games for a midseason tournament, okay, guys are getting hurt, and GMs are wincing when their guys are getting hurt in non-NHL games. But that's also the next argument is injuries are a part of the game, regardless of it's an NHL exhibition game, Four Nations round robin game, world championship, world junior game, whatever it is, there will be an injury at the end of the day. And I think it's kind of known, the players are taking that risk on their own by wanting to return to international competition. But you can also see the team's hesitancy when guys like Brady Tkachuk, Matthew Tkachuk, they're out. Matthew Tkachuk's out precautionary. Matthews out precautionary, and he's had injury trouble this year. Trocheck goes down through the tunnel, like we talked about. So is it going to create more of an argument in the next CBA? Because that's due right away.
I think the NHLPA is going to fight that because, like I said, the players, all of them are treating this like it's a Game 7 of the Stanley Cup. So they want to represent their country. They want to do this. They want to be there. Another name I didn't mention, and I saw this earlier on Twitter, was I saw Charlie McAvoy earlier was out tonight for rest. But I also saw that now there's a report, I saw it from one person, so I'm not going to say a report. But I also saw there's a potential he's dealing with an upper body injury, and his status for the championship game is still very much up in the air. So if that's true, that's another. I mean, the Bruins are a team that's struggling to make the playoffs right now. That's a big loss for them on the blue line.
Yeah.
If he is out.
And for the Four Nations side of things is the USA going into Thursday's game. Yes, they're losing a bunch of their top guys, but they have a really strong, like, between the pipes, they're fine. Like Connor Hellebuck fighting or with the onslaught of really good talent that the Canada or the Canadians have, like McKinnon, Crosby, McDavid, like they have a lot of really strong talent that can score big goals. McDavid obviously got the one goal on the Canadian or for the Canadians, but Hellebuck this season he's been at a whole different level, and I think it's showing in the Four Nations where if the U.S. are down a few of their top guys, I think Hellebuck's that game changer when it comes to what happens on Thursday night. Like,
Well, let's ask this question. I mean, I don't know if you had a chance to watch the Canadian game earlier today, but they, after Saturday's loss, mixed up their lines.
Yeah.
And Crosby fed McKinnon for a beautiful goal.
Yep.
And they said it right on the broadcast, is how does that not amp up Colorado fans to want to have Crosby now? Like, that just was a tease for them to have McKinnon and Crosby on the same line together. And
yeah. And
you're seeing it all over the place. Like, there's people, obviously, that are in trade conversations that are playing in this, that are playing on certain lines. And, fans are saying all over Twitter, like, we have to go get this guy and put him on this line with this player, and it'll make our team so much better.
And I think that's another really nice thing when it comes to the Four Nation, because you can see top guys play with each other, and maybe it might spark some movement between teams in the NHL. Like, you know what? Maybe we got to get this guy to put him with here, or with this guy, like you said. And kind of wrapping up here is one really interesting thing that I put on X today is I started a poll after Binnington. He let in 3 goals after Finland pushed right in the end, and it was a very interesting end, 5-3. My heart was racing because I wasn't quite sure after the Finns scored that 3rd goal if we were gonna stay in regulation. And my exact post was, quick question. Ahead of Canada's rematch against the USA, would you start Binnington or would you start Aiden Hill? And a very interesting thing is 71% voted start Aiden Hill and 29% voted start Binnington.
I questioned them starting Binnington today from the beginning.
Yeah.
Like, I thought today was a Hill game.
It should have been a Hill game. And now you have Aiden Hill, who's not played in this tournament, whereas Binnington has played 3 games.
Mm-hmm.
It is essentially a 4-game tournament, or it is a 4-game tournament. I don't see why Canada didn't start Hill at least once, and maybe Montembeault.
I would have either one of them. I mean, realistically, yep. And I'm looking right now. I'm just curious for a second here.
Okay,
going to the mantra of the Red Wings head coach Todd McClellan, the first to 3. Now, granted, Canada has been the first to 3 in 2 of those 3 games, but they've also Binnington's allowed 3 goals in all 3 games.
And
so,
I don't go into Thursday's game just from my perspective. I don't see why Canada wouldn't consider starting Hill over Binnington. But then you get back to that conversation of you haven't played Hill.
Right. The rust.
And the rust, he's been gone for a little, and now here we are. So,
but Binnington's also played some of his best hockey in the TD Garden.
That is true. But if he's played his best hockey in TD Garden, why didn't Finland come and make that push in the final 3 minutes?
They turned it on. They knew their season was on the line, and they put everything they had out there. Again, I mean, 6-on-5 for most. I mean, I think 2 of those were 6-on-5.
I think
so.
Yeah.
I think both Granlund goals were 6-on-5.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's the other factor into it.
Yeah.
But I like I said, I questioned after Saturday. I thought Hill should have started tonight or today, and then you make the decision going into Thursday if you move on. I also think that, once you had these factors, like I said, the idea of changing the schedule to Sunday, you had the schedule lined up. Maybe you should, after Saturday, once you knew the ramifications of each game, you could have changed U.S. Sweden to 1 o'clock and then made that other game 8 o'clock.
I also don't know why they wouldn't do like a TBD kind of deal.
Right. And find
Yeah.
out what's on the line.
Yeah. Because could you imagine if they did Sweden US and like 12 o'clock today Central, and then Canada and Finland are playing what would essentially be right now? I think,
Your viewership would have been a whole different number.
yeah, but like at the end of the day, I still think, regardless of viewership and regardless of scheduling, I think it was the right call for the NHL to keep the US game, which is they're playing it in the US at that prime time slot. Because at the end of the day, people are going to tune in to see the best American players play the best Swedish players, regardless of if something's on the line or not.
Yeah,
So,
but I mean, at the same time, being in the U.S., it is a holiday today as well. So, like a 1 o'clock game for most of the U.S. would have been fine.
yeah.
And then you're getting more. I mean, granted, if the day was different, yeah, I agree with you. But with the day being what it is, I think moving the U.S. game to 1 o'clock would have been fine, and having what realistically was a winner take all if you win in regulation, and you set up the possibility of a U.S. Canada championship after Saturday, would have even had U.S. fans locked in even more.
Okay. Well, I think that does it for you and I, Chris. And yeah, we'll see you next week, where maybe things will start to pick up a little bit more and we'll start to see the ensuing chaos of trade deadline.
We'll have a champion. We'll have regular NHL hockey back, and this season will roll on.
Yeah. All right. See you next week.